Welcome to the Big Success Podcast, cutting-edge conversations on business and personal success, as well as how to level up. Here's your host, #1 business coach in the world, Brad Sugars.
Radical Candor. Jason is my guest today, Jason Rosoff, CEO of Radical Candor. With Kim Scott, they've built an amazing organization that teaches companies how to grow through actual great conversations. Now, background, he's been tech industry, helped scale Khan Academy. You've probably heard of that one with Sal. And then went over to building great companies through great conversations. His definition of success, I think, is going to make you really, really think. And specifically how he goes back to his college years and how success was defined for him. Follow me with this. Jason Rosoff is going to blow your mind. Radical candor, radical leadership, and ways to do things differently. Let's get on with your success. Here's Jason. So, Jason, let me get your definition of success.
I think my definition of success is something that I think about every year, because it's not exactly the same for me year to year. When I start the year out, I often set an intention that helps me define what success is going to look like for that year. And I think that this year, the word that has come to mind most often when I think of success is growth. And so I think that it seems trite, except for the fact that people often get to the end of the year and they think of growth unidimensionally, like just in terms of revenue. But one of the ways that I'm most interested in growing this year and acknowledging growth as success is to look back and say, I am smarter and faster at doing the things that I do every day at the end of this year than I was at the start of this year.
Yeah. So how has it shifted over time then? If you go back to as a young man, how you define success through the tech stuff and building all the big tech companies, how's it shifted, do you think?
Well, I think in some years, success was, especially in years where survival was at stake. I feel like success, the definition of success is like, can we pay the bills at the end of the month? So Khan Academy was a not-for-profit, which meant we had to fundraise every year. And that was a stressful thing. And I wasn't directly involved in the pitches to potential donors, but I was building the products that Sal was going out and selling folks and saying, we want you to invest in the future of this company. And so even though we always kept our eye on the ball of making sure that students achieve their goals, that was like our #1 definition of success. Like, can we help students achieve their academic goals? There were other forms of success, which were like, can we fundraise enough to actually grow the company in the way that we wanted?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you go back and look at success, somewhere in life, most people had success chosen for them, or they chose success. Where do you think it happened for you? Was it as a young boy? Was it in your later years? Where did you choose to be successful in life?
Well, I think as a young person, I think my definition of success was very much predicated on other people's judgment or evaluation of me and my performance.
Yeah, we see that a lot, huh?
And so like in terms of like success being chosen for you, I think maybe more damning was success being defined for me. Like someone else was defining success for a lot of my life. And I really bought into that. Like I was competitive academically, like I really wanted to do well. And then I got to undergrad and I had this really eye-opening experience. I went to business school, to the Stern Business School at NYU for undergrad. It was very prestigious. It was great. I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I mean, I loved a lot about my time there, but in particular, the environment there. So there's this thing that existed when I went called the Stern curve, which basically meant that they graded on a curve and only 5% of students could get A's. 25 or 35% of students would get B's and everybody else would get below that. And I was like, that seems kind of stupid because like is it really that relative, or is excellence that easy to distinguish between, that you can say like, here's the exact cutoff point below which no one else would be considered doing excellent work? And so the game was sort of exposed to me in that moment. But worse than the game was how other people responded to the game. I've told the story before, but like I had this experience where I was in an accounting 101 class. And one of my classmates started having a grand mal seizure. So like one of those really scary, like twitching,
Yep.
shaking, et cetera. And the teacher, immediately went out and called 911 and was like getting the campus security there and all this other stuff. And the students around me started to cheat on the quiz that we were taking. And I was like, wow. I was like, this, it's all BS. Like this is, it is like the definition of success that I've sort of dedicated my life to. It was exposed in that moment as completely false. And so I really do feel like that there was a pivotal moment there where I was like, I need to define what I want out of life, like what I'm looking for out of this experience. Because if I let other people define it, the path is clear. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm going to have to live in a world dominated by a bunch of people who can see another human being suffering and decide like that's an opportune moment to get ahead on their quiz score. It was a terrible and life-changing experience.
It's those people that film the car crash instead of helping the person in the crash, isn't it? It's like, that's just insanity.
Yeah.
So over the years, you've obviously worked out your methodology of how to make success happen or how to make your goals a reality. What's your formula, or what's your methodology, or what do you think it takes to be successful in your world?
Brad, I don't know if this is going to be a disappointment to your audience, but I'm a grinder. Like I'm the type of person who just like gets up every day and works at it. And one thing that I feel like has propelled my success is not being afraid of doing things that I'm not already great at.
Got it.
The important thing that I realized was that for me, I feel most fulfilled when I'm doing a variety of things as opposed to like just being great at one thing. So I'm like a fantastic generalist. That's why CEO is a pretty good role for me, because that can mean anything.
Yeah, I get to choose which part I do.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the way I've started to think about my environment. The environment that best supports sort of my fulfillment is having variety, but that means doing things that I'm not great at, right? That means picking up new skills. The benefit of it is that I've often found that my desire to pick up new skills introduces me to what I would call adjacent areas of excellence. And some of the best sort of problem solves that I've made over the course of my career were not driven by functional knowledge or functional excellence. They were driven by the knowledge of the sort of intersection between functions or sort of disciplines in business. So I know enough about finance to understand, to evaluate whether we should raise debt or explore capital. I know enough about accounting to like make decisions about how we should like how to make sure that we're preparing for taxes at the end of the year, not just like managing the money in the bank account and cash flow, but thinking ahead to like the implications for taxes and things like that. That sort of generalist approach has been really, really helpful for helping me scale a business in a bootstrapped way as opposed to a funded way, which is how we scaled Khan Academy.
Yeah. So what's your theory on the relationship between failure and success then? How do you see them going together? Or do they go together?
I mean, to some extent, if you look at the external measures of success, so like financial success, for example, I feel like the relationship between failure and success is that people did not give up. They were not dissuaded by failure. They basically said, I'm going to keep trying. And so I think failure can be a great teacher, but the most important thing about failing is not giving up.
Yeah.
I think, and again, it seems trite, but so many people, for example, they try to do something they're not great at, they fail at doing the thing that they're not great at, and instead of saying, I can learn a lot from this and I can do better next time, they say, well, that's just evidence I shouldn't do that thing again. And I feel like that winds up narrowing the avenues that people have for success, their desire to avoid things that they failed at in the past. And from my perspective, I want to keep every avenue of success open to me. So not seeing failure as an impediment to trying again.
You're on the Big Success Podcast. We're going to take a break. Make sure you click that subscribe button. I'm going to be back with Jason Rosoff, and we're going to talk about candor. Radical candor, not just candor, radical.
Without the proper methodologies and strategies, building a wealthy life can be difficult. If you're struggling with building wealth yourself, this is the time to join Brad Sugar's 30X Wealth Program. The 30 videos in this program will help you learn how to make your money work for you, rather than you working for it. Create the life of your dreams.
You're back. Big Success. Jason, radical candor. How did it come about? What's the term mean? And why should we care about it?
Yeah, so radical candor, the term was coined by Kim Scott. She's my partner in Radical Candor, the company. And she coined the term over more than a decade of trying to describe and teach what successful management actually looked like. And in part, what she was trying to do when she coined the term was to put words to dispel a myth. And the myth is that in order to be successful, you have to be willing to be a jerk. That was the myth. She felt like she was constantly over the course of her career presented with this choice of like, if you want to be successful, you have to be willing to be a jerk to your team members. And she didn't like that choice. And so she looked around at the other people who were inspiring her and were being successful as leaders. And she noticed a pattern, which was that there was a type of successful leader that didn't have to make that choice, that was able to be kind and clear with their team at the same time, right? That didn't avoid discomfort, but also didn't descend into obnoxious behavior in order to overcome a problem or a challenge. They focused on both the person in front of them and the business problem that they were trying to solve. And the reason I got involved with it was I read Radical Candor. Actually, technically, I saw a talk that Kim gave first before I read the book. And what I felt is what I think a lot of people feel when they read the book for the first time, which is that Kim put into words a concept that is really difficult to describe and is not necessarily sort of widely understood or accepted. And so this idea of like, this is the way that I've been trying to manage my team with heart and mind and hands at the same time. Like it's all those things in unison. To me, that's what Radical Candor is all about. So I reached out to Kim when I was on my way out of Khan Academy, and I just said, hey, I don't know what's happening in your world, but maybe there's something we can do together. And I was coming off 7 years scaling Khan. So there was for me, I was like, I'm not really looking to jump into anything else. This is very exploratory. But for Kim, she was like, I feel like there's this big opportunity and we should get going right away. Anyway, we compromised. 6 months later, we started Radical Candor, the company, which still exists today. And our goal is to help people put the ideas and principles and behaviors of Radical Candor into practice in their own lives and in their own work, so that they can do the best work of their lives and build the strongest relationships in their careers.
Now, when Kim spoke at our BizX event, it's one of the reasons I wanted to get you guys on here. We'll dive into the management styles in just a little bit, but how do you care personally and still challenge at the same time?
Well, I think a good example of that is that my mindset, and something that can be useful to say to somebody else, is that the way I think of it is I have very high standards, and I believe that you can achieve the standards that I've set for you. that to me is care personally and challenge directly at the same time, right? It draws on a fundamental belief in another human being's ability to impress you, to grow and adapt and perform at a higher level. One of the things we love to say around here is that there's no such thing as a B player. Everybody has the capability of doing great work. Maybe not in their current role. Maybe they're not matched. They're not capable of doing great work in their current role, but they have the capability of doing great work somewhere. And part of it, the job of being an effective leader, is figuring out how to put that person in a position where they can do great work.
So let's then take a look at the management styles. And Kim and yourself, you break it down into 6 management styles you should understand and one you should definitely avoid. Where do you want to start? The avoid one, or start with the ones we should do?
Yeah, so I think the simplest way to think about radical candor is a kind of 2x2 grid. Yeah. Like all great management problems, it sort of boils down to a 2x2. And the upper right-hand quadrant, with care personally on the vertical axis and challenge directly on the horizontal axis. And that upper right-hand quadrant is radical candor, where you're doing both at the same time. And I think let's come back to radical candor and talk about the mistakes that people make, because in this framework, there's 3 ways to get it wrong and only one way to get it right. Well, that maybe is overstating it. There are many ways to get it right, but there are even more ways to get it wrong.
Yeah,
is a better way to say it. So when we challenge but we don't care, so that's that lower right-hand quadrant. Kim and I refer to that as obnoxious aggression. And that is being a jerk, right? That is, maybe what you're saying is useful, is like informationally useful, but it's delivered in such a way that it is completely demotivating to the other person to hear it. And if the goal in our relationships is to see the sort of potential in one another, a goal in any conversation is to help that person take a step in the direction of the potential that they have, of the growth that they're capable of. And demotivating them is a really great way to turn them off the path of growth and development.
Yeah, I was training one of our new dogs yesterday, and the dog trainers, they learn much better when they're happy. And it's like, it's the same with humans. If they're feeling good, they're going to learn faster, learn better, achieve more.
Yeah, well, and there's all kinds of research that actually backs this up, and the research is actually quite compelling, which is when you're talking to someone who is an expert in what they do, criticizing them, however you criticize them, is more likely to lead to a positive outcome. And it makes sense why, which is if you understand what it is that you're trying to do and someone's offering you a correction of like, here's a way to do what you're trying to do better, it's easy for an expert to figure out how to integrate that knowledge into what they are doing. But it is very hard for a novice, because one of the examples that I love, there's 2 studies that I love, but one of them is they took novice bowlers and they videotaped them, and they had an expert bowler review the videotape with them. And in one of the conditions, the expert bowler said, "Oh, you made a mistake here. You need to avoid turning your foot out the next time that you go up to the line." And in the other condition, the expert bowler pointed out something they did correctly, and the improvement that they measured in those 2 conditions was shocking. The people in the repeat a thing you did well group did improve twice as fast as the people in the criticism group. And it makes sense, because our bodies and our minds, like, we have these pathways, these sort of like sense memories. Yeah. And if you don't know what good looks like, it's really hard to correct. So like the most important thing you can do when you're first starting out is help people understand what is working well, especially if you're dealing with people who are more junior or more novice.
So let's go to the top quadrant then, the top left. How do you guys, what's the word for that one?
So that's where you care personally, but you fail to challenge directly. And we call that one ruinous empathy. And
ruinous empathy generally speaking, is such a great set of words.
Yeah. Well, there's a fantastic book. One of the things that inspired Kim, there's a book called Against Empathy. And the problem, there's 2 problems with ruinous empathy. So one of the biggest problems with ruinous empathy is you care so much that it causes you to sort of avoid challenging the other person. right? You're like, I care so deeply that I'm not going to say something that might upset you. There's this great book called Against Empathy. And one of the problems with empathy is that it can paralyze us. We start out with the best of intentions, which I want to show this other person that I care about them. But then we get afraid that that if we challenge them, that's going to upset them and therefore derail them. But the problem with that is it's a very paternalistic way of looking at another adult human being, which is like, if I have information that would be useful to you and I don't share it with you, that is not caring. That is abdication. You know what I'm saying? That in my mind is abdication of care. And so we often say that what you really want is compassion, not empathy. And because compassion propels us to act on behalf of the other person, whereas empathy is an internal feeling that might cause us to freeze in the moment and avoid the situation altogether.
Yeah, we don't want to see them fail long term. And otherwise, if we don't give them the feedback, they are going to. So let's go to the ruinous corner, the bottom corner. Tell me more about that one and how we get people out of it.
The worst of the worst. So that's where we fail on both dimensions. We fail to challenge directly or to care personally, and we call that manipulative insincerity. And those are hard. Those are sort of harsh words. But I want people to think about we often do a survey, so we say, which mistake do you make the most often? And almost no one puts themselves in this quadrant, even though it is incredibly common. The most common example of manipulative insincerity that I see in the workplace is talking about someone instead of talking to that person directly. So if you've ever engaged in sort of water cooler chatter, you have behaved in a manipulatively insincere way. If you've ever had a meeting after a meeting where you say, what a disaster that was, and can you believe Jason said this, and can you believe Jason said that, you have engaged in manipulative insincerity. So it's actually quite common, but it's also very corrosive. In any environment where it's okay to talk about someone behind their back, which is the most common example, it deteriorates trust so rapidly, and it normalizes this idea of not addressing issues directly. And that really gets in the way of building any sort of sense of team cohesion or collective culture, because so much is happening behind closed doors and is not being addressed in a way that allows people to grow and develop from the observations that people have of what could be better, that it stunts the growth of the organization and really dissuades them from becoming a cohesive team.
So how do we move forward? How do we move to that culture or that environment where it is safe to be candid, as well as, the high performance that we get from it?
Yeah. So for the people who I imagine in the audience who are leaders, what I would say is that it really starts with you and not your willingness to give other people criticism, but your willingness to accept criticism from other people. The fastest way out of all of the mistake quadrants is for leaders to demonstrate that they value the corrective feedback that their team has for them. And part of the reason why that's so important is we kind of need to feedback is sort of scary. It feels like the cost is potentially much higher than the benefit. Even though we know, we can sort of see when we zoom out and we take a sort of wide angle view of our lives, that failing to give feedback led to significant train crashes, you know what I'm saying, down the road. Like, we created the conditions for disasters to happen by not doing this. It feels very expensive in the moment. And so what you're trying to do is raise the market value of feedback. And one of the best ways to do that is to make sure that people feel comfortable criticizing their leader. Then it becomes much easier for people to accept criticism as part of a natural, one of the natural interactions that you have with your peers and your coworkers. So that's thing number one, is leaders accepting criticism. A step further is not only accepting it, but seeking it. So we call this soliciting feedback. The most common signal of success in any organization that we work with on Radical Candor is the leaders operationalizing soliciting feedback. So they add to their one-on-one agendas or to some process they have internally a specific time and place each week to solicit feedback from their team members.
Got it. So, and most of the time, is that done, face to face, or is it done through 360s? What's the I mean, I sit there and you say this and I'm like, do I really want to ask my team how like you said, it's courageous to step into that.
Yeah, it is. And what I would say is like, as we started this conversation, we were talking about what makes for success. And one of the biggest things that, from my perspective, is not being turned off by failure. I do think that being a leader means, and being ready to be a leader means having enough ego strength that you can absorb the sort of input or corrective input of the people around you. Because the hard part about being a leader is your organizational positional authority often just like makes it very scary for other people to tell you what might be wrong. And that is one of those things, you know what I'm saying? Like that we're laying the tracks for a collision.
Yeah.
When people observe things that are going wrong, but they're afraid to say what's going wrong, like those two trains are headed for each other at some point. And it may be years from now before you get they crash into each other, but they're destined to crash into each other.
So if I was thinking about, moving my organization forward because I want, obviously the better professional growth, personal growth, that sort of thing, asking for the feedback for myself, step one, how do I then transition that to the entire organization?
Yeah. So to answer the practical part of your previous question, I ask for feedback in my one-on-one conversations with my team members. I also ask for feedback as part of our standing team meetings. We do have a monthly pulse survey that asks just a couple of questions of sort of about like how people are feeling about various aspects of the organization. So I have 3 ways that I do it. I spend 5 minutes in a one-on-one, 10 minutes maybe once a month talking about like broad feedback at the organizational level. So in my sort of standing meetings, and 10 more minutes reviewing the results of that survey. So I'm probably collectively spending 2 hours a month soliciting feedback. And it has helped me catch a lot of small things before they become big things. And I would say that the number one thing that it has done, I often don't have to wait for that. Like people will often come to one-on-ones with me with like hey, I want to talk to you about this thing that I think could have gone better.
Got it. Fantastic. You're on the Big Success Podcast. We're going to come back and Jason's going to take us through scaling up. Make sure you click that subscribe button.
Jason Rosoff is the CEO and co-founder of Radical Candor. Over the last 4 years, he's helped all kinds of organizations, from tiny startups to the giants in the Fortune 100, realize the power of creating a more radically candid culture. To learn more about Jason Rosoff, please visit radicalcandor.com.
We're back. Radical Candor. Jason, you've used Radical Candor now to help organizations. What's the difference in your mind between an organization that grows versus one that really scales? How do you see the difference in the two?
Yeah, I think growth, it depends. Again, it depends on how you define it. But like growth is often defined by purely numeric things, like the number of people who work for an organization, the amount of revenue that you make. We in our goal setting this year, I have put together a definition for the team and set an objective around sustainable growth. And from my perspective, this is really sustainable growth is scaling. And the reason why sustainable growth is scaling is because sustainable growth is repeatable, whereas growth without scaling the other things that support people is destined to lead to burnout, which in turn leads to degraded experiences for clients or customers. Like that is the biggest problem that I've seen. Hyperscaling organizations, one of the ways that a lot of the financial success of the last 2 decades was achieved in Silicon Valley was by people working 20 plus hours a day. You know what I'm saying? Like people were burning the candle at both ends. And what wound up happening was organizations had 2 options. They either had to put golden handcuffs on people, meaning making it so financially disadvantageous to leave the organization that they were forced to stay, or they experienced churn, right? Or brain drain is another way to say it, which is like where experienced people get burned out by the crazy schedule and they go on to something else.
Yeah, start their own business so they don't have to work the 100,000 hours, everything. Yeah.
Yes. And so when we set goals internally, when we talk about scaling, we talk about doing things in a way that is repeatable and doing things in a way that doesn't burn us out or burn goodwill or sort of capital with our clients and our facilitators.
So when you take your experience I mean, Khan, you're in massive scale a lot of the time there. What were some of the key secrets to scale? Not the negative of everyone working 20,000 hours, but what were some of the key secrets to scale there?
One of the secrets from my perspective was to think of the organization as one of the products that you make, to think of the company as a product that you are creating. The customer for that product are your employees.
Got it.
And when you start to think of your company as a product that is experienced primarily by your employees, although your clients sometimes experience your company as well, depending on what kind of company you have, you start to notice the places, the bugs that exist in your company. And so one of the most we followed a really common track where it was like we didn't really have HR. It was external. We hired some contractors basically to do it kind of part-time for us. And as we grew, we started to run into real challenges. Like people started to want to have kids, and we didn't have like a parental leave policy. And then we were like scrambling to have a parental leave policy, or someone got sick and they needed to go on medical leave, but we didn't know how to what do we do? And who do we talk to about this? And I went to Sal and I said, this is a bug. Like, this is a huge bug in the organization. And here are the ways that I think it is costing us money. Like this is affecting the financial success of the organization because, we have people looking for new jobs because they're not sure that they could have a kid at this company. And Sal, to his credit, was like, I buy that. So I wound up taking a dual role at Khan Academy where I was both chief product and chief people officer. And I brought the sort of like design thinking or design centered mindset to the organization and professionalized our internal processes for helping employees. And so, I improved our review process across the organization so people knew better where they stood. I made us write job descriptions for everything that people were doing so they understood like what their actual responsibilities were. It seems really trivial, but it wound up making it so that it didn't stop the churn immediately, but what it did was it revealed the risks because people felt like we were paying attention to it and were more likely to talk to us as opposed to just saying, I got a new job and I'm going to leave. And eventually it helped us slow the churn down as well.
Yeah, it's hard to scale with churn. I mean, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's very difficult to do that. So let's just do a mindset thing then about scale or about big. A lot of people approach things, Jason, and even in the coaching you do today with the Radical Candor, a lot of people approach things with a goal of, like I'm going to hit 1 million, but other people come at it and say, I'm going to hit 1 billion. Like in your mindset, what's the difference between like a Sal or someone that just goes for this massive thing and people that just go for a normal size goal? How do you see those two differences?
I mean, what I will say is that when you talk about someone like Sal, we are falling victim to what's called survivorship bias.
Got it.
There are 1 million people who set the goal of 1 billion, and only one example that we can, or 5 or 10 examples of people who you can think of who made it. And so what I would say is there's a lot of luck involved in those things and timing involved in those in the billion. I don't think that there is a reasonable way, for example, to achieve the goal of creating another platform like Facebook where literally every person on the planet is on that platform. I don't think that is, and it's certainly not helpful when you start out. And the reason why is because it's important to remember what the goals of those organizations were when they first started out. So Sal's goal when he first started out was to help tutor his cousins.
Yeah.
That was his goal. he was making videos because there was a time difference between him and the cousins he was tutoring, and he was making these videos, and then he got feedback from his cousins, which was like, hey, we kind of like it better just to like watch the video first and then like talk to you afterward. Like we're liking that more than the live tutoring sessions. And it was from that Sal was like, well, maybe there's something to this and other people might benefit from it. And, Facebook is the platform for old people now, but when it started, it was a platform literally for college students to be able to sort of like keep track of, get in touch with other college students. And the original goal was to like scale to multiple college campuses. Like the original goal wasn't a billion people. It was only in looking back that the sort of trajectory, there's some storytelling involved. There's some mythology involved in the sort of like how you get to a billion, the overnight success mythology, et cetera. When what's really happening is like people are grinding for each additional user at the beginning. And if you do something that's exciting and useful to people and easily accessible, that's how you get like hyper growth.
Yeah. So let's look at the changes then in companies. When you get in there and you instill radical candor in an organization where they go from maybe not the worst of the worst, but they go from not really telling each other how the world is to moving that radical candor. What do you see as a difference to the people? And then what do you see as a difference to the organization?
I think much like tech organizations have technical debt, all organizations that are not practicing radical candor have feedback debt. So there's this like pent up sense of like things going unsaid. And the consequences of things going unsaid, they're physiological consequences. Like people get high blood pressure from it. Like literally it affects people physiologically to feel like they can't express what they're thinking to the people that they spend probably the most time with in their lives. Like many people spend more time with their colleagues than they do with their families. Like that. So the effect for people is like there's this when organizations do this well is often a sense of relief that like we can have real conversations with each other. And I think it's important to recognize that organizations that focus entirely on criticism, like just the things that are going wrong, fail at a much higher rate to build a culture of radical candor than organizations that focus on soliciting feedback and focusing on the good stuff, like focusing on praise and what's working well. So one of the other like important things about scaling radical candor is you don't want radical candor to mean getting criticized, because that's one of those like train wrecks waiting to happen.
Yeah, radical candor can also include you need to tell people when they're doing good stuff. And I don't know about you, but I've found that organizations struggle to tell people great things more than they struggle to tell people positive things. I don't know. It seems to be what happens.
I agree with that. And I would say is like in part because organizations tend to be led by people who are experts or near experts in what they do. And remember way back, I was earlier in our conversation, I was saying experts can get a lot out of criticism where novices or people who are new to something get a lot less out of criticism. But people, the sin of I manage others the way I like to be managed is one that every manager that I've ever worked with ever in any capacity has made. Like that is an error that we all make. And what I'm saying is we need to outcreate that instinct, which is to like manage people the way that we want to. And part of radical candor, part of the process of scaling this is recognizing that it might seem counterintuitive, but by role modeling being humble and willing to accept other people's criticism, that is a faster way to get people excited about receiving criticism than criticizing them.
Yeah. Jason, one last thing on positive radical candor. What's the best way to give positive radical candor?
Well, the good news is that there's one way to give feedback, regardless of whether it's praise or criticism. There's one set of guidelines that we have, and there are two acronyms: HIP and CORE. So HIP stands for humble, helpful, in person or in high bandwidth, so that you have two-way communication. In private, when we're criticizing, in public or in private when we're praising, and then not about personality. So that's hip. And this applies to both praise and criticism. It is equally bad to tell someone, is equally unhelpful to tell someone they're a genius as it is to tell someone they're stupid. And I think most people instinctively recoil from the idea that telling someone they're stupid might be useful. But often we're like, oh, telling someone a genius, like that seems like a good thing. But it often isn't, because you don't actually, that person may not know why what they did was important, or exactly how what they did was useful. So that's HIP. And then CORE really talks about the content of the conversation, and CORE stands for context, observation, result, and next steps. And so if I was going to give some radically candid praise, I might say, hey, in that last meeting, when you presented the figures on our sales growth for this year, and the CEO had a question, the backup slide that you had with all of the details really helped sell the CEO on the accuracy of the information that we were presenting. So the context is in the meeting. The observation is like you had the presentation and the backup data. The result was that the CEO was quite convinced of the direction we were taking. And the next step in that case might be, and I think that's a great practice or habit to be in. So make sure to include those things in make sure to include that backup data in future presentations. The criticism would work the same way, right? Hey, in that last meeting, when you presented the figures and the CEO asked a question and you didn't have the data to back it up, it really derailed our ability to make a decision coming out of that meeting to continue to the path that you were suggesting. And so in the future, I'd recommend that you bring some backup data to make sure that you can answer those questions on the spot.
Same structure, delivering two different messages. I love it.
Yeah.
Quick fire round. Just back to the subject of success overall. Quick question, 1 or 2 word answers. How do you succeed at goals?
Focus on effort over progress.
Love it. How do you succeed at self-development, personal development?
Be kind to yourself. Don't judge yourself harshly if you're not making as much progress as you want.
How do you succeed at relationships?
Care personally and challenge directly. I can't say it better than that.
So final question, Jason. And by the way, I've really enjoyed some of your team's podcasts. I think I need to get on the Radical Candor podcast. I think I need to be a guest on that. But thank you for your team doing those. They add a lot of value. Final question. What's the best quote or the best advice you ever got on the subject of success?
Well, that's a good one. I think the best advice that I ever got was start with the end in mind.
Yeah. Start with the end in mind. Yeah. Always a good one. This is the Big Success Podcast. We're going to be back next week with more success for you. Make sure you click that subscribe button, click the bell to get the announcements. We'll be back teaching you more on success and helping you achieve your dreams and goals. And that's the Big Success Podcast for today. Hopefully you took a lot of notes, learned a whole bunch, and if you need to, go re-listen to it. We dropped a lot of information right there today. Big success is what it's all about. And by the way, if you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button so you're here with us every single week on the Big Success Podcast. I'm Brad Sugars. That's BS. Big success is what we're shooting for. Check the show notes for all the links. Make sure you follow through. Keep learning. Keep coming back. Oh, and by the way, share this with any of your friends who you know are up for success. I'll see you next week on the Big Success Podcast.
You've been listening to the Big Success Podcast with the #1 business coach in the world, Brad Sugars. To learn more about how to achieve business and personal success, as well as how to level up or listen to past episodes, visit www.bradsugars.com.